ISO 1259. Okay, everybody ready? Let's do this.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone joining the Mann lecture. We will wait just a minute or two to let everyone who wants to be present join. Hello to those joining, just giving a minute to let all those who want to be here join us, and then we'll get started. Okay, good afternoon everyone from State College, Pennsylvania, also from Hopewell, Virginia, where our Mann speaker is right at this moment, and from wherever you find yourself today. It could be morning where you are, it could be evening. We would actually love to know where you're joining us from, so if you want to say hello in chat and let us know where you are, that would be wonderful. Thank you for joining us for the Penn State Library's 2024 Charles W. Mann Jr. Lecture in the Book Arts. My name is Clara Drummond, and I am the curator and exhibitions coordinator in the Everly Family Special Collections Library. I am joined by my colleague Christine Amos, our instruction and outreach archivist, who will also be hosting and moderating this event. Before I introduce our wonderful speaker this year, I want to acknowledge that the Mann Lecture is named in honor of the first Dorothy Ford Huck Chair for Special Collections in the University Library's Charlie Mann, who firmly believed that encounters with books, both rare and contemporary, should be available to as wide an audience as possible through teaching, exhibitions, and programming to facilitate further research and meaningful engagement. The lecture is made possible by the Mary Morst Endowment and the generous support it provides. We are honored this year to have IBé Crawley as our Mann lecturer. She is a visual artist and storyteller who serves as a founder and director of IBé Arts Institute in Hopewell, Virginia, and that is where she is joining us from today. She is the author of 11033, published at Women's Studio Workshop, the book she will be speaking about today, as well as the author of the books Delia Posey of Mount Vernon and Visible, both published by Black Market Press. Her most recent publication, The Book of Mary, gives an account and analysis of the book artist process. Her book's most recently commissioned artist book, A Dwelling for Her Story, is on exhibit at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. until October 2024. Crawley is also the recipient of a 2022 Looks Good on Paper Award from Pyramid Atlantic Arts Center in Maryland, and she holds a master's degree in education from Virginia Commonwealth University. 11033 is a poetic rendering of historic research. The text is an imaginary interpretation of the main character Mary Morst, a pregnant Black mother serving time for murdering her husband in 1914. The narrative, whose language, structure, and archival artifacts reveal the author's sensitive imagination, sheds light on the complexity of judgment. For those near Penn State, 11033 is on view until September 9th in the Special Collections exhibition Where Beauty's At, Expressions of Black Visual Culture, co-curated by Disa Garabidi and Brittany Frederick. And hey, just let me know that it is also on view at the State Library of Virginia, which is very exciting. So if you're in Virginia, you can see it. And it is also on view, I think, just behind her at the IBé Arts Institute as well. A reminder that the talk is being recorded, so there will be time for questions from the audience after the lecture. So please ask them. You can ask them in the chat or in the Q&A at any point during the talk. Racine will read the questions out loud for all to hear following the conclusion conclusion of IBé's presentation. So please join me in welcoming our 2024 Mann lecturer, IBé Crawley.
Thank you so much. This is beyond exciting. I want to thank the Charles W. Mann lecture for inviting me. And I want to also thank the curator. I want to thank the curator of the Special Collections for working together to put together a show that talks about my book, 11033, which they are home to at Penn State University. This book, 11033, it is an artist book that is a sculpture and a book. It tells a story, as do most artist books. Artist books tell stories by having a narrative. Sometimes they have images. Sometimes they may even have pictures. In this particular artist book, I use a lot of historic research. It's really focused on being able to look at the archival record, which I was lucky enough to be able to have access to at the State Library of Virginia. And in looking at that historic record, I was able to imagine the life of someone who lived 100 years before me. I have to say that Mary Morst actually passed away the year I was born. And so this story that I'm going to tell you today is about a woman who lived many, many years ago. And as I said, I found this record in the State Library of Virginia, and I find archival research to be an important way to tell the story of women. This woman in particular, because she was pregnant with twins when she was arrested in Danville, Virginia. Outside of Danville, more like Pennsylvania County. Danville has grown so much. But at the time it was Pennsylvania County. It was 1912. She was arrested for murder. And my interest in this story stemmed from my own childhood experience where one of my mother's friends was violently murdered by her husband. And I always wondered, what would it have been like had she murdered him versus him murdering her? Because similar to Mary Morst, the main character in my book, she had 3 children. Mary Morst, as I shared with you, was pregnant with twins at the time of her arrest. But according to the arrest record and the research, she had another 2-year-old in the home. So I used these facts that I gathered from the State Library of Virginia, but I originally came across this story looking at a book by a gentleman by the name of Dale Brumfield. When I first moved back to Richmond, I was really interested in what story has not been told that I want to be able to share, and particularly stories about African American women. Because I find that the historic record for African American women, unless they have done something of great note or their families have documented their existence, oftentimes African American women over the last 400 years of just being rich, resources for storytelling, the stories have not been recorded. So when I was looking at Dale Brumfield's book, I was at Fountain Bookstore, and in it there were 3 young African American women, and they had all been in the Virginia State Penitentiary. And the name of his book was called The Virginia State Penitentiary, The Notorious Prison. And in reading that and seeing her image and realizing that she was from near my hometown of Danville, Virginia, I thought, wow, this really would, if I spent some time looking at her arrest record, her prison record, all of the documents that have been gathered, because unlike the average woman, if you've gone to prison, there is a record of your existence. Someone has collected a lot of data to be able to make a case for or against you. So I said, wow, I could go to the State Library of Virginia and I could have access to those records, because there is a law that makes information over 75 years, that's public access information, available to people like me and the public who are interested in learning more about the lives of other people. So in going to the State Library of Virginia to look at their records, it's a wonderful experience to do research for those of you who do research. I love research because it is a way of pulling together story. Right now, you have an opportunity to look at where I pulled my story together. I was at the Women's Studio Workshop by invitation to create an artist book. I had started this process at home at my own kitchen table, just kind of assembling her story, pulling together bits and pieces of it as I went along in the research. When I saw this opportunity to tell the story at Women's Studio Workshop, I want to talk just briefly about that residency, because in residency, one of the things that I found to be wonderful is that I had a team who had tools, who had techniques, who had expertise, and they helped me to pull together this entire book. What's special about this book is, and I'll talk more about it as we go along, are the materials that I was able to use at Women's Studio Workshop. So, Women's Studio Workshop, I worked with Erin Zana and Laura Welling and Chris Patrone. And I was in the studio working with clay bodies, because this book includes a clay body, paper making, print making. I'll tell you more about all of those techniques as we go along. But I want to also refer back to how that experience influenced me as a storyteller. In being at the Women's Studio Workshop and having an opportunity to pull together my story in a place where I had all of these resources and supports, I thought to myself, wow, I'm an educator. I can do this with and for other people. I can have a space and a place where the story is available for people to see and think about and engage with, and even produce their own stories. And that was one of the most beautiful parts about being at Women's Studio Workshop, is that Laura and Erin both talked to me a lot about how the workshop operated and how to even begin to put together space and a place for my work. So you all are with me, and I'm with you right now from IBé Arts Institute. IBé Arts Institute is in Hopewell, Virginia, and I took the resources from the sale of this book. I was just blessed to have Laura and Erin do a phenomenal job, promoting this book. I took the resources from that book and bought this building that you have right in front of you. And this building was built in 1830 by enslaved African-American men for the purpose of educating white males on the Epps Plantation. And I was lucky enough to say, wow, if I use all of my resources, creating stories, creating books, I can restore this building as a place to be able to share my story. Go to the next slide, please. I want folks to see what the folks in this live audience is seeing. What they're seeing is the work that I do. I'm a stone sculptor. I also construct using found objects. The boat that you see in front of you is made from wood that I rescued from the floor of this building when we did the restoration. Go to the next slide, please. I also use found marble. Some of the marble pieces that I create to tell my stories are from old Baltimore steps, and I use this marble and I carve them. So this is what IBé Arts Institute is for me. It's a place for me to create and to show the story and pull the story together. The boats that you have before you have all of the clay bodies that were left over from this book project. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the making of those clay bodies, but I want you to know I made 100 clay bodies in the production of this book. Didn't use all of them because the edition is only 52 books. So I use the remaining bodies to create these boats, these images that told another aspect of the story. Let's continue with the story. I want to tell you a little bit more about Mary Morst, because I know that you're probably wondering, a pregnant woman in 1912, pregnant with twins, and she's arrested for murder. She killed her husband. That raises so many questions. I didn't have a portrait of Mary Morst. I wanted you to be able to see her as I saw her, but the only image that I had of her was a mugshot. And I wanted to talk a little bit about her mugshot because history is important in my family, collecting materials that tell our story. we have a lot of portraiture, you know, for African Americans in general. At the end of the Civil War, that was one way that African Americans documented their own freedom, was by having formal portraits made. And in my family, I steward my great-grandmother's sister's portraits. But a mugshot is not a portrait. A mugshot really is an object that defines someone as a deviant or someone as a criminal. And when I looked at this image of her, I know that based upon the historic record, she was found guilty of murdering her husband in 1912 when she was 27 years old. She was married, and similar to my mother's friend, I wonder, is there any indication of her intentionality? You know, what did she intend to do? I'm not sure about my mother's friend, whether her husband intended to murder her. And I don't know whether Mary Morst intended to murder her husband, but I know it's a fact that she did murder him. And I know that her life, in terms of going to the Virginia State Penitentiary, was also touched by the bias of those who looked at her case and made judgments of her. When I was looking at her record at the Virginia State Penitentiary and imagining her as a person, I looked at the historic record, the newspaper archive that told of the jury that was conflicted about her guilt. They spoke about her state of mind. I, on the other hand, I was really interested in the circumstances that surrounded the murder. What was happening in the home that would cause a pregnant woman in the last trimester of her pregnancy to murder her husband? What I wanted to know more about her. But the truth of the matter is that that part of her story was not recorded. So I looked at additional information in the historic record to say, what can I glean from the historic record that helps me to better understand her as a person? One of the things that I found in the historic record was that she had written a letter to the superintendent after her arrest, the superintendent J.B. Wood at the Virginia State Penitentiary. And she asked for permission, because her children were born within a short time of her arrest. She asked for permission to give her children away. And I wondered, my goodness, at that time there was a code in the state of Virginia that said that the child would stay with the mother up until the age of 4 years, and then the state would have the right to dispose of the child as it saw fit. And I thought, wow, here's a mother asking and taking the liberty of saying, I know of a place that I want my children to be. That spoke to me. It spoke to me about her as a mother. And as I did additional research, what I found was that time of incarceration in the Virginia State Penitentiary, according to Dale Brumfield, was one of the most difficult times in prison history. Even at the time that Mary Morst was arrested, the one and only African-American girl child was executed in the electric chair in the Virginia State Penitentiary. I know that she, going into that penitentiary, saw things that you and I might never imagine. For example, there were 8 other children born in the penitentiary, along with the children that she, delivered, and who were living in the penitentiary with her children. But she had to also work in the penitentiary. She worked along with many others, according to the historic record, in the tobacco fields and the laundry, because these sources, these contract laborers, contracted with the state penitentiary in order to have workers to reduce, the state made money because it needed to reduce its Civil War debt. And there were many children in the penitentiary, children as young as 12 years old. So the Virginia State Penitentiary experience, she could see that if she didn't get her children a home, that they would end up in a cycle. And W.E.B. Du Bois talked about how at that time in the state of Virginia, Virginia was developing this, he said to the fact that the prison system in Virginia is so horrendous that we are graduating a whole almost class of future people who will remain in the penitentiary. So Mary Morst took liberties to try to find a home for her children, while at the same time the historic record shows that there were many people who were also writing to the superintendent, and you can see in front of you the letter from the superintendent. The letter from the superintendent says the state has rights. That's a whole story. When one reads the book of Mary Morst, we see her as a mother who's asking her children to pardon her for the conditions that they find themselves in. In this book, I've created this clay body that stands, that represents her, because she did take a stand. I wanted the clay body to be thin enough to be wrapped around by these handmade paper that I made up in the studio workshop with her record embedded beneath. So looking at her mugshot, looking at the historic record, thinking about and imagining what she was experiencing, what the children were experiencing, in my mind, I heard this narrative, and I want to share it with you. These are the words that are in the book, 11033. I imagine these words. My dear children, before you get here, I want you to know everything is going to be all right. I don't know how long we will get to stay here together or how we will survive, but we will. About your daddy, he is dead. It's my fault, kinda. You don't deserve to come and find him dead. In his sane hour, he loved intensely. He would have loved you both. I'm sorry, me in the pen for murder, you in the pen too, and you haven't even been born yet. I beg you to pardon me. When you get out, when I get out, when we get out, I'm going to find some help. I'm going to fix up a place for us to live. The law says that we can stay together for a while, up to 4 years. That will give me time to work some things out for you. I got a cup of prayer. I take it every day. I'm going to give you some too. I'm going to take a cup of joy too. I feel you both kicking and shoving inside of me, inside this tight space. Son, dance with your mama sometimes. Dance with your sister too. You will have to be your own kind of man. Your sister will have to be her own kind of woman. I'm sorry I can't give you somebody to copy. So be your best self. For right now, I thank you for living inside of me after all that you witnessed. I promise to do my best, Mama. These words came to me after studying the historic record, reading the newspaper account, reading the letters that she wrote, reading the letters that were written to the superintendent, reading her parole record. Yes, she was paroled 8.5 years after she entered the prison. Her children were 8.5 years old when she was released. They had spent 4.5 years in an orphanage. She gathered her children, the older child and 2 younger children, the twins, and she moved to West Virginia, Crystal, West Virginia, according to the historic record, and lived with her father for the rest of her life. She lived there with her family members, and the record shows that she spent her last years with her grandchildren. I think that she was a phenomenal woman. She was, to be able to take the story of what was the circumstances surrounding her in prison and the ways that she tried to rescue her children, the actions of her release and going back into society and being able to raise a family. She's only one woman with one story, but that story is a story worth knowing and worth understanding. If for no other reason, folks who are interested in social justice can look at that story as an example of what is possible. Folks who are interested in the law can look at the legal system and ask themselves, what are some of the changes that are occurring that support women and children and men and children and families? Folks who are interested in the arts can see another way that we can tell a story using visual images. From my friends at the National Park Service who supported me by allowing me to engage with their young interns last summer who created their story from White Hill Plantation based upon historic records. Oh, this industry, this opportunity, it's not an industry, I guess it's an art form, but it is just magnificent in being able to help people to heal themselves, help people to be able to archive their lives and tell their stories, and being able to leave a future record for future generations. I am very proud of this book, 11033. I thank you at Penn State University for purchasing a copy. I'm grateful to all of the universities and museums that chose to buy a copy of this book for their collection. And it's exciting because it says to me that thousands of students each year have the opportunity to engage with this book across the country in multiple institutions. Thank you all for this opportunity. I appreciate being here.
Wonderful, thank you, Diana. I know you have people in the room with you, so
Yes.
we can take a moment to clap. Thank you so much. I, of course, have many questions for you. It was wonderful to hear the story and about the making of the book. But first, I want to invite those who are with us, they're in chat or in Q&A, to ask questions. And again, my colleague Racine will be facilitating the asking of those questions. So, Racine, I turn it over to you if there are any questions to be asked. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So our first question is, can you talk more about the materials used in the art book?
Yes, thank you. I had so many things I wanted to tell you about this. This is abaca, cotton, and flax. It's a mixture. In the paper making studio, I'd never made paper before. So at Women's Studio Workshop, Chris Patrone, she showed me how to pull paper and told me to have fun. I knew that I wanted to embed images. I wanted to embed parts of the historic record, which we copied onto archival paper and cooched it between two very thin layers of wet paper. This book also has pulp paintings in it, so I made a stencil of her image. As you can see, that is also the structure of the book. It has deckled edges, so the edges are not perfectly cut, but yet it all conforms to her body shape. And between those pages are those images. What I love about the pulp painting is that if you hold the book just so, in a certain light, you can see different images between the pages that you wouldn't see if it's just laying flat. And so an artist book, what's wonderful about it is it can stand, and in this case, and be a sculpture, but it's also meant to be read. And so that's one of the reasons that libraries enjoy it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I love that it can stand up. I love what you said, that it can both stand up and be sculptural, or turn pages like a traditional book. We had to think about how to display it in the exhibition. The exhibition's on for quite a few months. We didn't necessarily want it standing for that long. Like, we didn't want there to be any damage to the funding. So we decided to lay it in a cradle, but we made sure that you could inside and see the ceramic silhouette, because that's such an integral part. Thank you. Racine, I turn it back to you. Pardon me.
Man, I just want to.
Wait, you may have something to add.
You spoke about the clay body, and I wanted to say that that idea for the clay body came to me when I was doing a residency at VisArts here in Richmond, and I knew that I wanted it to be strong enough that it would stand, but it had to be thin enough so that it didn't obstruct it. And so what I love about working with clay is so malleable, and the color came out wonderful. But you know, it's wet clay, and then you fire it, and then when it cools, and now if you touch it, it's cool to the touch. I love those different dimensions of the clay. And also, it's fragile. So if you knocked it over, as you said, it would break. And for me, that spoke also to her state of mind. That's one of the reasons why the jury's concern for a state of mind didn't make sense to me, because it was like, yeah, she broke. I mean, for her to have murdered her husband. So I just wanted to talk about the use of the clay body and how it represents so many things. I'm sorry, Reese.
Okay, keeping with the materials, we have a question about how did you manage to make the paper thin enough to be translucent?
We just did a lot of experimenting. The number of hours of beating the wet pulp to get it really, really soft and thin enough so that it was translucent even in that very first pull. Also the abaca, that was another, abaca wrinkles and yet flax adds, more body to that. The cotton, it makes it soft. So played with translucency, weight, texture. One of the things about this particular book is the very outer layer of the book, next to the bars, is the more cardboard-like layer of paper. So each layer gets thinner and thinner, and that was really interesting to me. And in the process of making all of this paper, different parts of it are sitting around, and I would go back and look at it. And then one day I looked at it, and the image that you're looking at right now with the half sheet covering half of her body, I was like, oh, that's exactly what it's supposed to look like. So, yeah, the paper weight, yes, I was very concerned with that, but it was just a matter of pulling it and beating it just the right amount. And Chris Patron is phenomenal. I mean, if you ever have an opportunity to do a residency at Women's Studio Workshop, it was a joy to work with her.
Awesome, thank you. Again, keeping with the physicality of book, how is the clay body secured? And if possible, can you show the clay body?
Here, I'll try to, I know there's a picture for the clay body, so then there's a photo, there's a good image.
Yeah, that's a good image of the clay body. And would you repeat the question one more time, please?
How is the clay body secured?
It's stitched, and you can see it has a 5 stitch, and basically the book has all of these layers in it, so it kind of spreads out, and I opened it kind of to the center, and then I stitched the clay body at the very center of the book. So it was hand stitched.
Okay, awesome. Does it open 360 degrees?
It opens 180. But you can walk all the way around the book. Because the bars on one side, the exterior bars, are part of the visual image in terms of it being a sculpture. Because the bars represent the prison when you open it up. And the paper is so thin, it almost feels like she could fly. So when you open that book up, it's almost like she's going to fly out of that prison.
There's a question regarding how is it bound and what did you use to get the color?
Well, we of course started with white cotton and the abaca, but we tinted the paper. We experimented with tints and colors, and we would add different. We did mock-ups, and we compared the color of this particular paper to a brown paper bag because I knew that I wanted it to be the color of brown paper bag. So we just kept adding it, different colorations until we got the perfect consistency of color. But the goal was the brown paper bag.
IBé, I love how you're talking to the collaborative nature of making. It's something we talk to our students a lot in the history of the book about how we often think of books as just having one author or artist, but that it really is a collaborative, deeply collaborative work, right, for the materiality and the binding. So it's great to hear about that aspect of the work, the labor of the book.
But I know that we're coming to a close, but I cannot highlight enough the collaborative nature of the work that I do. Every aspect of my work, requires working with other people, whether I am in workshop or a residency or planning with folks or generating ideas with folks or just learning from others how to accomplish a way to pull it all together. I'm really fortunate to understand that it's teams, it's tools, and it's techniques that allow my work to just have this level of beauty. If I did it all by myself, it would not be nearly as beautiful. So I'm really grateful for the teamwork.
We still have time for questions, so
okay.
I see if there are more. Please, by all means.
I didn't realize that.
Viewer, how did you first find your way to the book as the main form for your work?
So, I'm a storyteller. The story is my first motivation. As a child, my great-grandmother oftentimes told me stories about family members or about experiences and things that had happened. So storytelling is always where I start from because I'm interested in other people's stories. I like to hear people talk about themselves. So I've been a sculptor because I like the physicalness of making objects, creating things with my hands. Because growing up, my grandmother sewed and stitching was important and patterns and structure. So all of those things, those ways of producing have always been important to me. So story, that's my cognitive self, and then production, and that's my physical self. Right now I also have a show at the National Museum for Women in the Arts. I have a piece that's on exhibit there. But I bring them up because probably 15 years ago, as a teacher, they had a bookmaking workshop. And I taught U.S. history. And I thought, wow, how do I get my students to be engaged with something that they see so far removed from themselves in terms of time? And so when I saw this bookmaking workshop, I was like, maybe the idea is that they could make books about themselves or about their families, just to kind of get them grounded in history is really story. And so I took that bookmaking workshop at the National Museum for Women in the Arts, and I loved it. I thought, wow, this works for me too, because there's so many stories that I want to tell that I can't verbally tell all of them, but if I create them and someone else can pick them up, then those stories just live and live and live. And so that was the beginning of that whole process of book making for me. And Aldrich, my husband, he's a collage artist. And I would see him oftentimes collecting all these different materials and stamps, and he'd make stamps and images and pictures, and he'd make these collages, and I thought, wow, that's a great way of telling a story too. And I love materials, so what kind of materials can I use in telling my stories? So of course paper, a lot of my work includes paper, but then I started looking around me at, bits and pieces of things, string, buttons. What can I include in that story to make it more interesting? So that bookmaking practice really developed. And then by the time I got to the pandemic, and I was stuck at home like everyone else, that became a great outlet for me, creating books as a way of telling stories. And I had never made paper before, as I said. And when I saw the announcement for Women's Studio Workshops residency, I said, I'm going to apply to that. And I sent them the mock-up. I made 5 different mock-ups. And like I said, I started this clay body at VisArts. Jeff Vick, who is a great ceramicist at VisArts, he helped me with this clay body, and I submitted it, and of course putting it in the mail, it was broken by the time it got there. But they got the idea, and Erin Zana reached out to me, and she said, I think that this is something that you can come here and do. We have all of these different studios, and we don't have our full cadre of residents right now. And so, as I said, I was lucky enough to go there and work with so many different studios, and there wasn't any other artists there except for me. So I had all of this support. And the beauty of it is, I made books because I wanted a way for me to tell stories. I didn't realize and didn't know how big of a art form bookmaking really could be. Because I had not experienced book arts with other people. But now that I am, you know, a bookmaker, I've met all of these other wonderful bookmakers and I'm learning from them. So I think that book arts is a good way to be able to tell story.
So, and along that line, if somebody wants to learn about making books, where would you recommend they start? You talked about this a little bit. Let's say with artists.
So I love community spaces. I've spoken about VisArts. There's in Hyattsville, there's Pyramid Atlantic. There are all of these community spaces that offer opportunities for people to come in and use their services. You can become a member. You may take just a workshop or a class, but I think community spaces that offer book arts is a good way to do it because you're working with other people. Sometimes you'll have an instructor that teaches a particular style. All of those things I think are good ways.
Mapping. Let's reconnect it.
Okay.
This.
Yeah,
I'm just turning off my computer.
it's okay.
I wanted to free the bandwidth. Just leave it for a second because it just needs more bandwidth.
I don't need to do anything. Do I have my phone in my? I'm already on my phone.
Oh, I don't know where it is.
Thank you all for your patience.
All right, let's try that out. The computer is not it's no longer connected to the internet.
Okay, just gonna. Thank you.
Okay, now.
Thank you. Perfect. You all look good.
Recording in progress.
On the work that we do. I'm hoping that IBé will be able to rejoin. Let's just give her a
I'm here.
minute.
Can you give me permission?
You're here,
I
okay.
am.
Wonderful.
Thank
I'm
you.
just gonna stop our share for a minute.
Okay.
Hold on. Oh, good, you're back. Hold on. I'm gonna make you a co-host so we can see you again. Sorry, I was just saying. Are you there, IBé?
I am.
can hear you.
There we are.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
I was trying to fill some time. I was just talking about how meaningful the book has been with teaching and students and how they've been really drawn to the book for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. I mean, it's unlike any book they've ever seen. So it's just like visually interesting. And the close, we have talked a lot about this in our history of the book about thinking about form and content. I see that Chris is there, is in chat, talking about how his students engage with the book. But they've been really taken with this idea of the connection between the form and the content and how closely you've thought through all those things, which is what you walked us through in the making of the book. So, Racine, I think there are probably more questions. We were interrupted, and I think it's fine to give 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes to questions since we had a little break. We're so happy you're back.
Thank you.
There's a lot of questions here.
Okay.
So in your research, why do you think she killed her husband?
Why do I think she killed her husband? I think that she broke. I think that because the clay body broke. And that was, I remember the first time the clay body broke, I felt like it was a statement about an intense feeling that, and I'm a mother. I have 2 sons. When I try to imagine being pregnant with twins and killing someone, my mind says, wow, something really bad happened, you know? I don't know what really bad happened. That's not recorded. But as a human being, thinking about the circumstance, her being pregnant, and the fact that they were concerned, the jury were concerned about her state of mind, I could only think she broke. Now, why did she break? I don't know. I don't know if it was intentional, if she had thought it out, but I know that sometimes that happens to us as human beings. There come a moment where we just can't take anymore. And so I imagine, that's what I imagined happened. But I can't speak to the exact.
So, through your account of Mary's life, through your work in storytelling, is so powerful, emotional, and thought-provoking. I'm wondering if you've had any contact with Mary's children or grandchildren and their reactions to this beautiful story and piece.
And that's a great question. I get it all the time. For me, I think the truth of the matter is that I like the historic research. I like reimagining the record. And so no, I have not reached out because that seemed to go beyond the record. And I feel as a human being that everybody deserves the privacy of their lives and their family lives. And so I'm sure that if they ever saw this and they reached out to me and wanted to talk, I'd love to talk to them, but I didn't feel like that was appropriate for me to do.
Thank you. Did your work on this book bring you some peace or closure as it relates to your mother's friend's murder? How mentally and emotionally taxing was the research and the creation process?
Well, I think what's interesting is that we all carry childhood memories. We all have something that's going on in our lives that relate back to when we were kids. And though my sister and I, Rosalind is my sister, we talk all the time about this experience because we were so young. We were less than 10 years old. And I remember it very clearly. It was a Sunday morning and we were preparing for church when my mother's friend was violently murdered by her husband. And I feel this sense as a child, an adult, feeling my child self, that I was in such grief because my mother was in such grief. But that's what I remember. How much of our memory is what we feel and how much of it is the exact events in order? I know that that's not true because my sister tells me things all the time about, no, it didn't happen that way, or this happened that way, and I realize that what I remember might be different from what someone else remembers. So I think that you asked if it brought closure. No, I don't think that I'll ever have closure about that. It was too painful as a child to experience that you have children that I played with for their mother to be murdered. I think it left some kind of a scar there for me. And I think that has a lot to do with the work that I do, because much of my work is centered around healing. I mean, maybe I haven't completely healed from some of those childhood wounds, but and maybe that's why I also like the physicality of life. I like to touch and feel life and put my hands on it as a way of healing. But I think that the work that I do is about telling and recognizing the African American women in particular, and children and young girls have stories that we haven't even begun to unearth, when we haven't taken time to listen and to really connect with them. And so the work that I do is to try to make visible some of those feelings that I find in historic records. And I'm going to give you a quick example. I'm currently doing some research looking at some records from 1833 in Richmond, Virginia to 1844. And it's amazing to me that I meet so many young girls, 14 to 27 years old, who have run away from their owners during this enslavement period and taken their own liberty. And it's kind of like, oh wow, I want to imagine, where did they go, and where did they land, and who helped them, and how did they survive, and they stayed here in Richmond, you know. So story, I'm interested in recreating it and reimagining it.
I love that, because thinking about your work, there's a long tradition of Black women doing the kind of creative methodology that you're doing. I was thinking about, I read Life of Phyllis by Honoré Fanon Jeffers, which is the same, like a poet who's also trying to, fill in the historical record. So sorry, I'm jumping with my own question, but I was wondering which storytellers have been inspiring to you and sort of in your artistic journey? So whether those are authors or artists, I was curious.
Well, of course I love Toni Morrison and all of those great writers, but I'll tell you the biggest influence is my great-grandmother. I would ask her the same story over and over. And I think my second big influence in terms of storytelling was my pastor. My pastor was my cousin. His name was Lawrence Campbell. I grew up in Danville, Virginia. And we went to church 7 days a week. And in going to church every day, you always heard a complete story. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It had a text. It had a reference. And he always told a good story, and there was a punchline, and you could, apply it to your own life. I think that the way he trained me as a storyteller, and I really do feel like that was my training, is through my church experience, how to tell a story, how to engage an audience, how to have the rise and the fall of the story, how to use text, and how to create a visual image.
Wonderful. I don't know, Racine, should we do one? I thought there were some questions about what you're working on.
Yes.
What you're working on now, like what comes next. So maybe that would be a good final question to wrap up with.
Okay, and also, there was a request that we could scroll through pictures of the book again.
Oh, sure. I will share my screen while you're telling us, IBé, about that. I will share my screen.
What am I working on next? I would have to say that the stories that I was just sharing with you about, thinking about particularly African American women and girls who lived as if they were free during the 1830s, 40s, and early 50s, but who really were enslaved to someone, and how they maneuvered their lives here in Richmond, Virginia. So I've been really trying to reimagine Richmond during that period of enslavement. So that has required me to remove 95. If you know Richmond, running through Richmond, Virginia is their Interstate Highway 95. So when you take that 95 away and you fill it in with people and streets and houses and where people lived, and you imagine those people moving around those streets and what's on those streets and who they would have come into contact with. And there are, again, so many historic records there, maps of Richmond and lists of property owners and stores and all of those things. Those stories, trying to bring that particular, thinking to life is really what I'm thinking about a lot these days. Who knows? Maybe it'll become a story. But one of the things I found is that sometimes I have too much information. So I have to kind of say, okay, narrow it down. So that's my story.
I feel like that's the problem with every good storyteller. So, but as you're leaving us, IBé, I just want to thank you again, and I'm going to go to the last slide because you wanted to share some of the works that informed the talk. So I'll just leave that up on the screen for people to see. But thank you so much for joining us. What a pleasure to hear about your journey, about this book and future projects and the Arts Institute. I really hope to visit you in Virginia, or visit the Arts Institute in Virginia at some point, and I encourage others who also find themselves in Hopewell, Virginia, to pay a visit. So again, so much gratitude. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all people logged in. So yes, everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
It's always hard to hang up from these things because we still have people online with us. So,
Okay, well then I'm gonna hang up and talk to the studio audience.
I know you have your audience, so I will call you. We'll
Okay.
talk again. But
Thank
just
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you so
Quick
much.
question, did know somebody had asked, are there copies of the book available for purchase?
Oh, yes, and I think the very last slide. Oh, are you talking about the lecture? Because I did a book of the lecture. So if these books, we pretty much sold out. We have some artist proofs remaining, and then we have, I think we have 4 more of the original, and you can reach out to my email address, and I think it's on the very last slide. If you write to me, if you're interested in the actual original book, or if you want to get a copy of the lecture that I did today. And the lecture I did today has some images in it as well.
Wonderful.
Oh, this is Black Market Press.
Okay, I will say that on the Women's Studio Workshop site, it does say that the artist book is out of print, but maybe people should still reach out.
Yes, if they're interested, you know, I have 1 or 2 copies left, and I also have some artist proofs, so be in touch. Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Eva. Enjoy your audience.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You did well.
You did great.
And now we wait for the movie.
Well, do you all have any questions? I went through that. I think I got confused. I think you said I had been talking for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think I thought.
It was second 15.
Did you want to
Oh, no.
You started
Don't
wrapping
be
up.
I
You
know.
really only spoke for 20.
I know.
Yeah.
That's all
But
right.
you have enough questions to fill up
Yeah.
the rest of the time.
Yes. A
Well,
lot of good questions.
And they ask the questions that you would have asked in here.
right.
Yes.
So that's what happens when you get there.
Sorry.
No,
Okay,
not your
okay.
fault. Any other thoughts, questions, or ideas?
I don't have any question, more a comment.
Okay.
I like the story, and I can empathize and probably sympathize with Mary with her story, because having worked in a court system for almost 35 years, I have seen ladies who come to court that are pregnant and really did not have a strong family connection, and some did, but sometimes you don't know what happened to the children that are born while they're in prison. And I can imagine how Mary must have felt when she went to prison. I have had the opportunity to visit several of the prison institutions around the country, from Youngstown, Ohio, to Stone Gap, Virginia, and Sussex, and I've actually gone inside to visit inmates, and even not as a inmate, when you go inside those prisons and you hear those keys turn, because they lock you in when you go to visit, and they search you from head to toe. You almost feel like you're a prisoner even though you visited. Now, her being a prisoner, I can imagine how she felt, and especially in her condition. And also, I have a lot of empathy for her as a woman, and especially an African-American woman, because women on the whole in this country have not been second-class citizens, they've been last-class citizens with respect to voting and certainly any kind of rights that would come close to a man. They've always been last. in this country. And you can even relate that to the events that's going on today that we see every day on TV with respect to the abortion rights. Men, for some reason, feel that they must tell women what to do with respect to their health care and what's permitted and what's not permitted. And one thing you never hear in response is anybody trying to tell the men what to do with their bodies, which I find just ridiculous and repugnant, but that's the way it is. And Mary's story, the part that was left out where you couldn't find records as to, any evidence as to why she killed her husband. And as you also pointed out, if that had been a man, I believe there would have been records as to why he killed his wife. I think at some point in time during our history, with women not having the same equity as men, some stuff it wasn't important to our system. They just left it out, forgot it, or didn't record it on purpose. Now, if she was convicted, there's no reason under the sun there shouldn't have been a record as to what happened.
Right. And that was the record. That was what was missing. It was even missing from the record. Because the state librarian told me that it had not been the transcript had not been transferred to the state library. So they didn't have the transcript in the library. They had the prison record, but they didn't have the transcript. And I actually wanted to say this, I used the date of her arrest, looking back at the day on the register and B to find the clip that wrote about her arrest, and that's also in the book. And that's how I knew that the jury had a difficult time coming to a conclusion. But there was I did not have the access to the transcript,
So jurors at that time were all male?
yes.
Of course.
Yeah. And all white.
Wow.
Yeah, women have always been the last on the totem pole.
Yeah.
I think what I really like about this story is that as I'm getting older and I reflect more on my mother, she apologizes a lot more now as an adult, where I'm like, why were you apologizing when I was a kid? But it's like that idea of her, like, asking her to beg your pardon, beg my pardon. Like, you're not asking for anyone else to give you any, it seems as though she doesn't care what everybody else will think of her. And I'm sure there's a lot of people thinking something of her and judging her for the situation that she has potentially put her children in. But she's not apologizing to them, she's apologizing to her children. And I think that's just very powerful when I think of all the times I think my mom truly now, I think sometimes when I even just think, because we've had conversations about this, is that the way that it looks when you apologize to a child, people tell you, oh, you shouldn't apologize. They're a child, you shouldn't apologize to them. And I think her perspective is so much different now about what it means to really apologize to a child, but also be a parent who apologizes to an adult. And how powerful that is for your personal relationship with your child, and not thinking about what everyone else thinks about you apologizing to someone who you own or someone you've given birth to and owes you things. Just seeing them as people, like just human beings, is very powerful in this book.
I have a question about that, about the letter, and I'm curious, like the sort of mental gymnastics of coming up with what you thought that letter should include. Does that make sense? How do you go through a process of taking in all that research and imagining what the letter that includes represented her thoughts?
And so I was driving a broad street and I heard her say, this is it. And I pulled over into the Lowe's parking lot and I wrote down. And exactly what I wrote down is the exact thing that's in the book.
And one just
one, my dear children. What would a mother say? My dear children, before you get here, I want you to know it's going to be all right. I don't know how long we're going to stay together here, but we're gonna survive. And, when you get out, when I get out, when we get out, I'm gonna find some help. I'm gonna fix up a place for us. I mean, doesn't that seem like something that any mother would, if anyone cares about another person's life, and feels a sense of responsibility for that life, would say to them, it's like, okay, you don't deserve to find your daddy dead. He is dead, it isn't my fault, but, you're gonna have to find your own model. And I thought that was also interesting to hear her say that, that you're gonna have to be your own kind of man. And that was the thing that I didn't talk about, which I prepared a big spiel about, was the power structure in this historic record. There was this, prison superintendent, Superintendent Wood. There was it was her husband. It was the jury, which were all men. You had her son also had power. She says to him, dance with your mama sometimes. Pray. Have some joy in life. Be kind to your sister. I mean, she gives him directions. She's issuing directions to those children about how to live life. And I thought, that's so powerful, because for me, it really made me think about women during the period of enslavement and how families were separated all the time. But that mother parting from those children, whether they were a 13-year-old girl knowing that you don't know what kind of situation she's going to find herself in, or it's an 8-year-old girl that's being, sent to be someone's, playmate, and you're not with that child on a regular basis, and they're exposed to, a lot of people who don't value them. What did women have to say or do in order to release? We see these images in art even of women just on their knees just begging. But my research shows that they were also working behind the scenes. They weren't just, on the auction block begging, but they were working out that they knew a sale was coming, and oftentimes they would approach a white person that they trusted, that they felt would at least try to do right, or maybe would purchase both of them, both of the children together, or the mother with the children. They would seek out foster care settings. They would say, this is your community, and this is going to be your grandma or your aunt from here on out, and you got to listen to her, and I trust this person. So I think that, that particular history is really strong for me, is what women do or have done in order to secure safe passage in this world for their children. And so I think that, yes, reading her record, having my own life experiences, it just, that narrative just kind of spoke to me and made sense.